The sailors the governments labeled the most dangerous criminals on the ocean were, in many cases, running a more democratic operation than the government sending warships to hunt them down. This video covers how Golden Age pirates actually governed their ships, who held power, how decisions got made, and what happened when someone got hurt on the job. Most of what gets taught about pirates is either wrong or missing the most interesting parts. Stay until the end, because the document that governed life aboard a pirate vessel reads less like a criminal code and more like a constitution written by people who had been badly treated and decided to build something better. To understand how pirate ships worked, you first need to understand what most of these men were running from. The Royal Navy and merchant shipping in the late 1600s and early 1700s were, for ordinary sailors, genuinely brutal. Captains held near absolute authority. They could flog men for minor infractions, cut food rations to pocket the difference, and work crews to physical collapse on voyages that stretched for months. Pay was irregular, often withheld until the voyage ended, and sometimes not delivered at all. Merchant sailors died at rates comparable to soldiers in active combat, largely from disease, malnutrition, and accidents that better resourced ships could have prevented. Many of the men who ended up on pirate vessels had not set out to become pirates. They had been pressed into naval service against their will, or had signed onto merchant ships out of desperation and found conditions far worse than advertised. When the opportunity to take a ship and run it differently came along, a significant number of them took it. The first thing a pirate crew typically did after taking a ship was draw up a set of articles. These were written agreements that every man signed before the voyage began. The articles varied between ships, but the structure was consistent enough that historians have been able to piece together the general framework from surviving documents, court records, and accounts from captured pirates who described them during trial. The articles covered several things: how plunder would be divided, what behavior was prohibited on board, compensation rates for injuries sustained during combat or work, and the authority structure of the ship, including exactly how much power the captain actually held. That last part is where it gets genuinely surprising. A pirate captain was elected. The crew voted him in, and the crew could vote him out. Several well-documented pirate captains were removed mid-voyage because the crew decided they were making poor decisions. Bartholomew Roberts, one of the most successful pirates of the Golden Age, served under a captain named Howell Davis, who was killed in an ambush in 1719. The crew held an election on the spot to replace him. Roberts won. He had been a navigator, not a fighter, and had been a captive of the crew only weeks earlier. They voted for him anyway because they thought he was competent. He went on to capture over 400 ships. The captain's authority was also much narrower than you might expect. In battle, a pirate captain had something close to absolute command. Speed and decisive action in a fight required it, and the articles reflected that. But outside of combat, the captain was one voice among many. Major decisions, including which targets to pursue, where to sail, and whether to accept a prize or burn it, were put to a vote. The quartermaster, a separate elected position, managed the day-to-day affairs of the ship and handled disputes between crew members. He was specifically designed as a check on the captain's authority during non-combat operations. So if you are picturing a pirate captain standing at the helm making unilateral decisions about everyone's fate, that was mostly the Royal Navy. The pirates had a system. The quartermaster also oversaw a distribution of plunder, which brings up the pay structure. Pirate shares were not perfectly equal, but they were far more equitable than anything available on a legitimate vessel. Captains typically received between 1.5 and 2 shares of any prize. Officers received slightly more than ordinary crew, but the floor for an ordinary crewman was a full share, guaranteed by the articles before the voyage began. A merchant sailor or naval rating had no such guarantee. Records from prize court cases show that ordinary pirate crew members were often carrying more personal wealth than the officers of the ship sent to catch them. The injury compensation clauses in pirate articles are the detail that tends to stop people cold, and they should. Surviving articles from several Golden Age pirate ships list specific payments for specific injuries sustained in service. Bartholomew Roberts' articles specified 800 pieces of 8 for the loss of a right arm, 600 for a left arm, 500 for a right leg, 400 for a left leg, 100 for an eye, and the same for a finger. These payments came out of a common fund set aside before individual shares were distributed. If you got hurt serving the crew, you got compensated before anyone else collected their cut. The British Royal Navy in the same period had no formal injury compensation system for ordinary sailors. A man who lost a hand on a naval vessel might receive a one-time payment at the discretion of his captain, or he might receive nothing and be discharged as unfit for service. The men classified by European governments as violent criminals outside the protection of law had built a workplace injury compensation system before most of those governments had considered the concept. Now, life on a pirate ship was not perfect. The articles also specified punishments, some of them severe, for theft from crewmates and desertion in battle. Violence between crew members was handled through a formal process that usually involved the quartermaster adjudicating disputes, with the option of a supervised duel on shore if the parties could not be reconciled. The internal discipline of a well-run pirate ship was strict in some respects. What made it different from naval discipline was not the absence of rules, but where the rules came from. A sailor on a Royal Navy vessel followed orders because the alternative was flogging or hanging. A pirate crew member followed the articles because he had signed them voluntarily and understood that the system they created was what kept his share of the proceeds protected. The golden age of piracy ran roughly from the 1680s to the 1730s. By the time it ended, European navies had become organized enough to make the Caribbean and Atlantic too dangerous for independent pirate operations at any scale. The men who had built these elected, article-governed ships were hunted down, tried in admiralty courts, and hanged publicly as a warning to others. Their articles were read into court records as evidence of criminal conspiracy, which is largely why historians have them today. Read without the framing of the trial, those records show a group of men who had been let down by every institution they came from and decided to build their own. They got things wrong in plenty of ways. The violence was real and the victims of piracy suffered for it. But the structure they created was not the behavior of people who rejected civilization. It was the behavior of people who had seen how civilization actually worked for people at the bottom of it and decided to try something different. If that version of history is more interesting than what you got in school, subscribe. There is more of it. Drop a comment with the story or period you want covered next.